Here's a problem where I am to compare the magnitude or the size of two numbers. For example, I need to know whether 6,500 is 10 times greater than 65, or perhaps it's 100 times greater than 65, or perhaps it's 1,000 or 10,000, and so on and so forth, times greater than 65. To compare the size or magnitude of two numbers, especially if they're very large, like 43 million is, let's go to a place value chart to see how this works. So I am comparing the number 6,500. So I put a 6 in the thousands place, a 5 in the hundreds place, to the number 65, which has 6 tens and 5 ones. You do not need to write the numbers out in general to do the problem, but I'm going to just to explain the first example. It turns out that whenever you move from one place to the next in a place value chart, the numbers in the next place to the left are always 10 times as big. A 10 is 10 times as big as a 1. A 100 is 10 times as big as a 10, and this goes on for any of these. For example, if you were to go from 100 million to a billion, since it's one place further to the left, a billion is 10 times greater than 100 million. It turns out if you want to move two places to the left, so suppose I went from comparing 100 million to 10 billion, because I would have to move to the left twice, this means that this place value is 10 times bigger than this one. What's more is this one is 10 times bigger than this one. So moving twice to the left means you went 10 times as big and then 10 times big again. And when you take 10 and multiply by 10, you get 100, meaning that if you move two places to the left, it is 100 times as big. And it turns out, if you notice, that the number 100 has two zeros in it, and you can use the fact that each place moving to the left gives you an extra zero in your answer. The fact that I had to move left twice put two zeros in my answer, meaning that this is 100 times bigger than that. So it turns out if you were to write the numbers out, one way to compare one number to the next, in this example, since the numbers are starting out the same, this number starts with a 65 and this number starts with a 65, to compare the two you can count how many more zeros this number has than that one. The fact that this has two extra zeros in it means that how many times bigger it is would involve the number 1 followed by two zeros. So 6,500 or 6,500 is 100 times as big as 65. But you need not write it out. Another way to do the problem would be simply to know that the number 6,500 would start in the thousands place because we started with 6,000, and the number 65 would start in the tens place because the 6 here is in the tens place and the 5 is in the ones place. So to compare 6,500 to 65, you would just know that since to move from here to there is two places to the left, that the answer is going to be the number 1 followed by two zeros. Again, the number of places you move is equivalent to the number of zeros. So any number that starts in the thousands place compared to a number in the tens place is going to be about 100 times as big. But since they both start with 65, they're not about 100 times as big, they are exactly 100 times as big. So as long as the digits start out the same, you would know exactly how many times greater one is relative to the other. Now let's go back to the Math-AS problem, and I'm going to use the pull down menu to select 100. Now the next question has us comparing 66 billion to 66,000, and because they started with the number 66 here, and they compare it to a number that starts with 66 here, we can tell exactly how many times greater one is relative to the other, again by going to a place value chart. To write 66 billion compared to 66,000, 66 billion would be written by starting with writing the number 66 followed by several zeros, and 66,000 would be in the thousands place, but since it started with 66, you would start with a 6 in the 10,000s place and a 6 in the thousands place, just like 66 billion had a 6 in the 10 billions place and a 6 in the billions place. So we are comparing a number that starts in the 10,000s place to a number that starts in the 10 billions place. So it turns out because these two numbers are the same, I can tell how much bigger this one is relative to this one by simply counting how many places I need to move to the left to get from one to the other. So let's count the number of places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places to get from one to the other. So my answer is going to involve the number 1 followed by 6 zeros, 1 0 for every place value that I had to move over. Since each place value to the left is 10 times bigger than the one next to it, it adds another 0 to the problem. Now if I go starting from the right and count every 3 zeros and put a comma, noticing that this is the number 1,000,000 means that this bigger number is 1,000,000 times greater than the other. Another way to have done this problem, which would have taken longer, would be to write out the number 66,000 and to write out the number 66 billion. And the reason it would take longer is simply that I had to write them out. However, suppose you had a problem where somebody had already written the numbers out, it would not take longer to do so. In fact, I would argue that it may be quicker, because if you have the numbers written out to tell how many times greater one number is the other, you just count how many extra zeros are in one number relative to the other. So again, this only works because we're starting with the number 66 here and comparing it to a number that starts with 66 here. Now it's a matter of just comparing how many extra zeros this number has relative to this one. So this number has 3 zeros, and this number here has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zeros. So if this one has 9 zeros and this one has 3 zeros, since 9 take away 3 is 6, that means this number has 6 more zeros than this one. Now you saw me cross these out because what I was going to do is compare these 3 zeros to these 3 zeros, and since they were the same, I was going to cross them off and only pay attention to the extra number of zeros. So to argue that this may have been a quicker way to do the problem, I simply could have just visually, from the start, compared this number here to this number by just looking at the number of zeros that this bigger number had that this one did not. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros more than this number. So the answer involved the number 1 followed by 6 zeros. It is 1,000,000 times greater. So going back to this question, 66 billion is 1,000,000 times greater. And if you buy this method, you could just compare the number of zeros here relative to this one and see that since this number has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 zeros, count them carefully, and this number has 1 zero, that means that the big number has 5 more zeros than the smaller number. So because of that, we know that this number is going to be 100,000 times greater than 430, and the reason I know that is that the 100,000 is the number that has 5 zeros in it. Let's go back to the place value chart to show you this answer in greater detail. So the number 43 million, if written in the place value chart, would start in the 10 millionths place. These 3 digits would fill these 3 cells. These 3 digits would fill the thousands group, and then the 43 would put a 3 in the millions place, and the 4 would be in the 10 millions place. Comparing that with the number 430, the 4 would be in the hundreds place. So to take a number that's in the hundreds and compare it to a number that would involve ending in the 10 millions place, the fact that you'd have to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times to get from here to there means that the answer would involve the number 1 followed by 5 zeros. If you put your comma after the first 3 zeros here, you would see that this number is 100,000 times bigger than this one. And again, because it was written out, you actually could just compare the number of zeros. This had 6 zeros. This number had 1 zero. And by comparing, that means this number had 5 zeros in it more than this number had. And we were able to tell that it's exactly 100,000 times bigger only because this number started with the digits 4, 3, and this number started with the digits 4, 3. So either way you look at it, I'm going to select 100,000 as my answer. Don't forget to submit your answer. And you should get green check marks on all 3 parts if you got them all correct.